If I had to pick a distillery that had the most active year in 2024, the first one that comes to mind is James B. Beam Distilling Company, which you might know as Jim Beam. And that is because in the year of 2024, they have had more new releases than anyone out there. And that's not just high tier releases. It starts with their low tier release this year of their 7-year black label, which they changed all the way up to Old Grandad 16, which is their newest release, and it comes in at one of their highest prices at $200. In between there, we've got the Little Book chapter, the Booker's Blends, no Knob Creek stuff. How about the Baker's 13, the Baker's High Rye 7-year, and also what we have in front of us today, the Little Book, the Infinite Edition #1. And in this video, I'm going to rate and review Little Book Infinite Blend Edition #1 and see whether or not it is worth the $200 price tag that you'll see out there on your next hunt to the liquor store. And I'm going to put it to the taste test on my own rating scale, which I call the lightning counter. It is a 5-tier rating scale judging the nose, the palate, the finish, the mouthfeel, and the value, all coming to a 10-point rating scale. And in the end, you'll see how it stacks up versus some of the other bourbons and whiskeys that I've rated and reviewed so far here in 2024, as I'm on my quest to find the best whiskey of the year. Thanks for stopping by, everybody. My name is Brandon Spinner, and you have stormed yourself here into the Whiskey Weather YouTube channel, where I say it is always whiskey weather. As I go forward, I want to ask you, what is your favorite Jim Beam product, or what is that go-to Jim Beam bottle that you always have to have on your shelf? I'm going to go with it, and I'm going to say Old Grandad 114. It is one that I had not tried until earlier this year, and as you saw in that video up there, it's one of those that you have to start your bourbon collections with, and I hate to admit that it took me so long to try it. So drop that in the comment section below. I want to hear your go-to bottle, and let's jump right into the review. As far as the Little Book, the Infinite Blend, this is just what it sounds like. It is an infinity blend, and we'll dive into the specifics here in a second. A couple new changes with this that you're going to notice. There's no plastic up front. The normal Little Book chapters 1 through 8, have all had a plastic sheath on the front, just like the Booker's bottles, but this one comes with a little just black token. It really doesn't do anything to hold the bottle in, really. I mean, it kind of does, but nowhere near the other stuff. Otherwise, it's more of an elegant, black, sleek bottle. The label itself, usually that has more of a cream color, and there's some gold lettering. And inside, instead of the normal tag that would be on there, there's more of an envelope on this. So the Little Book, the Infinite Blend, is a blend, and 70% of that blend was put into bottles. The other 30% were put into tanks to prevent further aging, as Freddie No is starting his own Infinite series, similar to maybe the Infinite Blend that you have seen from Old Elk, or the Solera aging process that you've seen from Hill Rock, even Blade and Bow. But the Little Book is a blend of 4 different bourbons. Yes, Kentucky straight bourbons, and very similar to how Wild Turkey did it with their Generations blend, we've got the Generations of the No family, and that goes from Booker No, who was the 6th master distiller of the Jim Beam Distilling, all the way down to the 8th master distiller, which we know as Freddie No, and in between there we still have Fred No, and they all have whiskey that was their distillate that has come to be part of this bottle. Freddie's was a 7-year Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. Fred's was a 14-year Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, and Booker's is a 20-year Kentucky bourbon whiskey, and the 4th blend was a family blend, which checks in at 8 years. All of that blended together. We don't know the mash bill on this. That is not disclosed, but we do know that it checks in officially as a 7-year-old bourbon, and that proof point on the Little Book, the Infinite Edition #1, is 119.3 proof, and for you ABV nerds, that is 59.65 ABV. On that little card that it has, it says, "Welcome to the Infinite." Through this series, I'll share a new side of Little Book. As always, each edition will tell the story, but this time it's not mine alone. This whiskey brings together bourbons distilled by my granddaddy Booker, my dad Fred, and me, for the first time blending our journeys as whiskey makers into a single liquid. It's been 3 generations in the making. Enjoy. Our first edition, the liquid that will form the foundation of our infinity barrel. Once a year, I'll bottle up some for the world to try, then I'll explore how to push the profile forward through blending. So savor this whiskey today and come back next year for its evolution. And as you hear that, next year, of course, edition number 2 is going to use the same base, but I'm sure Freddie's gonna find something different. Now, I wonder if they'll continue with the bourbon because they started with 4 bourbons. So this should be similar to the Booker's blends of this year, but different because, of course, we're talking 20-year bourbon. But the Infinite comes in with a price tag. It's pretty hefty. It's $200. So is it worth that $200? There's been a lot of price increases on bottles this year, especially those higher defined prices and on those higher defined bottles. Pouring it into my Whiskey Weather Glencairn, which are now back in stock. And if you are interested, because of Celebration, them being back in stock, I do have them on sale from my website. And I'm giving you guys a promo code if you want to save 5%. That is back in stock 5 on the website, whiskeyweather.com. I've got that in the link in the description below. But again, Little Book, the Infinite, comes in technically as a 7-year-old bourbon, but it's got some 20-year-old juice in it. Oh, and that's delicious right off the nose. Cherry was the cherry forward, but that peanut nuttiness that comes through on a lot of those Jim Beam profile whiskeys. So again, as I mentioned, this is a Generations blend, similar to how Wild Turkey did it with their Generations blend. So there's a lot of history with this. And damn, that nose is very good. So the first part of my rating scale is the nose. And all of these categories are equalized. So they're all worth 2 points. All 5 of them come together to create that 10-point rating scale. The nose has the caramels. There's a little bit like of a burnt walnut. Cherry. There's some dark fruits, very similar to the bourbon that you get from Jim Beam. So if you are a Booker's fan or you are a Jim Beam bourbon fan, this is classic Jim Beam bourbon, but a little bit more oomph with some of those darker notes. The cherries are the first thing that come to my mind, but then again, that peanut note. Very delicious nose. We're going to 1.7 out of 2. So very good nose. And let's see what it tastes like. Okay, let's burn off that. It's warm to start. That's the first thing I'll say. It's a whole lot of flavor. There's a lot to unpack with this. Mouthfeel is very velvety and it's viscous. It coats the whole mouth. It gets very warm. And you get that Kentucky hug as you swallow it and chew on it. It is very good. Flavors are very oaky. That's what I get. There's that 20-year bourbon coming through. But very similar to how Barrel Craft Spirits does their blends with some higher aged whiskey. You don't get that just dark char that just takes over with the bitter oak, which we've seen in Knob Creek 18, as well as Elijah Craig 18. Speaking of Elijah Craig 18 and Knob Creek 18, I did do a review of those earlier this year. You can check that on the top right. But that nose matches the palate. There's a little bit of that bitter oak, but it's not overpowering. You've got a lot of that dark fruit, plums, some fig, some cherry in there as well. Even that cherry cola, which I got in the earlier Booker's edition that I did earlier this year as well. The caramels are there. This is really good. I'm gonna go with a 1.6 on the palate. One thing I would look a little more for is a little more sweetness. It's there, but it does get overpowered a little bit by that cinnamon towards the back end. But that's a very delicious palate. So a 1.6, that's a high score for a palate. Not a ton of them get that high. Except my latest review, which was the Russell's 15, which you're going to want to check out. That is the latest review. And as I mentioned, I've got a lot to do review-wise between now and the end of the year. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button below, as I've got about 10 to 12 more videos to try to put out between now and the end of the year before I get into my top lists. The next one up will be also from James Beam Distilling Company, Booker's The Reserves, which I got at the Kentucky Bourbon Festival, where I was lucky to get a hell of a haul. So on the palate, as I mentioned, it's a little warm, Some sweetness, but not overly sweet. So if you're not an overly sweet fan, this is right up your alley. The mouthfeel, that's the next on the rating scale. Creamy, I said velvety, viscous enough. It does get a little tingly on the back end. A very good mouthfeel. We're going to 1.8. The only thing that I would look for is maybe for it to just coat the mouth even more. I do feel like it dries out real quick, but that's just like a real harsh critique on something that I think is fantastic. So 1.7, 1.6, 1.8 so far. The next up on that lightning counter, the finish. Okay. Finish starts out with those cinnamon red hots, which I have tended to get from the Booker's blends and a lot of Jim Beam whiskey. It's very cherry forward, like a, I'm calling it cherry tart with some cinnamon on top. It does start to burn a little bit. That oak comes through, a little bit of leather, maybe even a little bit of tobacco on the end. Very good finish. It's still talking to me. It still lingers on my tongue and within my mouth, and I probably would say this it's going to last a while. It does run a little warm, but for 119.3 proof, it does not drink like it's blowing you away. I hate using the word smooth, so I'm not going to say that. It is not smooth, but there's a tingle. I'm sure this would be great on ice or with a couple of drops of water as well. I know viewer Dave Vogel saying tends to drink his on the rocks. Yeah, finish is good. 1.5. Wish there were a little more sweetness. That's probably the only critique I have on any of the flavor or the finish itself. Just a little more on that spicier side rather than the sweeter side. Nothing against that, but again, 1.5, that's a good score. So then the question comes to the value. $200 bottle of bourbon, which is starting to get up there. A lot of people say that they won't even spend more than 100, so that's double this. The Little Book chapter this year, chapter 8, came in right at $160, so this is telling you that this is a premium version of the Little Book chapters, which are already up there in pricing. I did find this at Costco as well for $185. If you find it there, definitely try to grab it at that price. $200. Would I buy it again? Probably. Part of it being a collector's edition. So there's a little bit of value there. But if you're solely going just for a high proof whiskey, I think that there's other stuff out there for a cheaper price that's going to give you something similar. I mentioned Old Grandad 114 earlier on. That's 5 proof points off. Of course, it is not as old as the Little Book Infinite Blend. However, I'm not comparing them as apples to apples, but if you want to save some money, I would go that route. So for this, the value, I'm going to go with a 1.3. 1.3 is not too bad. Still a little steep up there in price. I understand there's 20-year-old whiskey within this, and it is a collector's edition for some folks. So there's a little bit of value there. But also, if you're looking for a high proof pour, I would even buy a Booker's probably over this just because that's closer to the $100 price point rather than the $200 price point. And they're going to be very similar. This is very good. Don't get me wrong. I just think that the value there as a 1.3 just because kind of takes it down slightly. So when it comes to a total lightning counter score, let me add it all up. So when it comes to the final lightning counter score, drum roll please. Total lightning counter score comes in at a 7.9 out of 10. That is one of my higher rated bourbons of the year. It does come in as a whiskey as well. It is not the top whiskey of the year as you see there on the list. That is held and passed up by a pair of bourbons that I've already reviewed this year, which is the Russell's 15, which is currently the top of the charts and most likely the front runner for 2024, followed by Old Fitzgerald, the VVS, but this is very close. This is a 7.9. That is an above average, very good pour, close to excellent, very, very good. As I mentioned, I would buy this again. Happy with the purchase, but again, if you're not someone who spends a lot of money on bourbon or whiskey, you may want to stray away from this one, just because I don't think that this one's going to blow it out of the water for you. And I would save my money maybe for something a little more higher tier, like a Russell's 15, or maybe that VVS if you can come across it, as they might be a little more expensive. But I think overall your experience is going to be slightly better than this. But overall, not knocking this at all. Very happy. Again, a 7.9 out of 10. That is one of the highest rated bottles so far this year for me, and I've tried quite a bit of whiskey. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button below if you're interested in more bourbon and whiskey reviews going forward. I do want to give a big thank you to all of my Patreon subscribers. If you haven't seen that so far, we're seeing a ton of people joining what I call the Stormfront, and this month I'm giving away 2 bottles because it is my birthday month, and I do a bottle giveaway every month, but also giving away 2 samples of Russell's 15 and 1 sample of Old Fitzgerald VVS because I wanted to share the wealth. The only way to get that is by joining the Whiskey Weather Patreon Stormfront or hitting that join button below right here on YouTube to become a YouTube member and become part of the Stormfront. All in all, a very good bourbon, 7.9 out of 10. Very happy with it, and I'm excited to see where it falls by the end of the year on that full rating scale. If you are interested in more of those bourbons that I've rated and reviewed so far this year, you're going to want to check out that link right there on the top right. Between now and then, though, just remember, it is always whiskey weather. Please drink responsibly, and we'll see you in that next video. Cheers, y'all.